Hello, it's Mrs. Bradbury. Today we're going to talk a little bit about scientific understandings. We are going to use genetics and development as our kind of case study in understanding how scientific understandings can change over time, but that doesn't change what's actually happening. So, to talk about development, a lot has happened over the years with trying to explain how a baby happens and how it gets parts of its mother and father. So, in the beginning, Aristotle had decided that a father's semen, as you see here in this picture, encodes the characteristics of the father, and that a mother encodes her characteristics in her own situation. Now, they also decided that at this time, heat and cold can influence the cell that's being developed. That time, they didn't know it was a cell, but they knew that something was happening. And they figured out that heat could actually overpower cold, in their opinion. And that if the heat overpowers the cold, they're going to get a boy. If heat does not overpower the cold, then they're going to get a girl. Now, we have come a long ways from that, but it took many, many steps to get to where we are today with our understanding. Now, it's important to note babies today are still formed in the same way as they were then. Now, the next idea that came about was preformationism. In preformationism, a baby was inside of every single male sperm. And so that little baby inside of here, as you can see, the head is at the top, there's legs here, there's arms holding on to the legs. They believed that inside of every male was just a tiny human. Now, the issue with preformationism, when we look at it today, is that it doesn't explain how women play any role at all in development and in how a baby is going to look like its mother sometimes. At that time, it could have been explained away as like just something that they didn't quite understand, or as some higher being caused them to look this way. What came after that was Lamarck. And Lamarck had this idea that something could change based on something that it went through. So in this case, the blacksmith example is that a blacksmith gets strong muscles from his work, so therefore his sons inherit those strong muscles. One of the most famous Lamarck examples is that giraffes get long necks because they keep reaching their necks out. And every time they lengthen their necks to try to reach leaves, it causes their necks to get longer. And so their babies are born with longer necks. Now, we also know this to not be the case, and right now it's pretty easy to argue it because we have different understandings now. However, if we were born at the time of Lamarck, we would probably have believed this same thing. So, Lamarck's idea would be, hey, if something happened to my thumb and I no longer had a thumb, then in Lamarck's ideas, then if that worked for me, then maybe my babies would be born without thumbs. We know that that doesn't happen to people, but at the time, this was a plausible explanation using the knowledge that they had. The next one we have here is Mendel. And we know that many of Mendel's theories have turned out, or many of Mendel's facts have actually produced good theories and laws. Now, in this case, we had a little bit better understanding of how all of this worked, but we still didn't have all of the answers. So, in Mendel's experiments, he found out that there were two different heritable things, heritable characteristics that went on to each organism or to each part of the organism. So, in this case, he knew he was learning about dominance. So, WW mixed with RR gives us heterozygous individuals. Now, that went along with understanding genetic material. Genetic material was the next step. So, in this case, we had some issues with trying to figure out exactly what the genetic material was. When they eventually determined that it was DNA, then they had to figure out what the structure of DNA was. Now that we understand all of that, we have a pretty good understanding of how all of this works and how it's connected together. So, the big thing to take away from this is that knowledge can change understanding, but it doesn't actually change what happens. So, you're going to write a short podcast where you're going to be communicating all of your information and explaining science understanding and how understandings can happen, and also how understandings can change what we know. Now, it's important to remember that understandings changing what we know does not change what happened. It only changes our explanation for what happened. So, For our next day, I want you to come into class with an idea of which understanding you are going to choose for your podcast.